going to take a little bit of time here to introduce to you logic, and we'll start off with a couple cartoons. Doesn't it seem strange that the cleaners would shrink all your pants? Well, what do you think? Is that good logic? Is that the best explanation? Or maybe he's just gained a lot of weight, right? Or this one. I would like nothing better than your pecan pie, Loretta, so I'll have nothing. Okay. And then Farkas. So I say if it's not worth doing well, it's not worth doing at all. I guess that's turning around the expression, if it's worth doing at all, it's worth doing well. Okay, another way to look at it. But that's his logic. That's how he's processing things in his mind. Well, let's talk about the 3 laws of thought. These are basic, very basic laws. They should be an assumption for all of us in our communication, in our interaction with one another, in our writing. The first one is the law of non-contradiction. I tried to get a philosophy group that I had in my home one time to agree on this law of non-contradiction, because it should be an assumption that everyone shares, because it's the basis really of all thought, of all logic or communication. And you'll see what I mean here when I define it. Something cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same sense, right? Something cannot be something and its opposite at the same time and in the same sense. Now, what if I said, I am married and I was actually a bachelor? Is there a sense in which I am married could be true? Well, if I'm considering myself as the bride of Christ, I could claim to be married in that sense, even though I'm not married to a woman, right? Now I am married, so I can say I'm married in one sense and I'm married in another sense. But the caveat here is that it's in the same sense that you're talking about, because something can be, let's say, one color when looking at it from one direction and another color when looking at it from another direction, and it depends on perspective, depends on what sense. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when you're making a claim that absolutely contradicts another claim that you're making. It's like saying God is Trinity, which Christianity says, and then someone else saying God is not Trinity. He is only one person. Well, that's an absolute contradiction. That's making a claim on one hand that is saying the opposite of another, and they can't both be true. God cannot be both Trinity and not Trinity at the same time and in the same sense. So this is an important law, and a couple other ways of saying this is the law of excluded middle and the law of identity. And so I'll share these here. The law of excluded middle says something either is or it isn't. Okay? Can't be both. And the law of identity is something is what it is. It's not what it's not. It is what it is. Okay? Now these are very simple laws, and I hope you agree with these laws. I hope you accept these and use them and are aware of them, because you use these laws. You assume these things. and they're important for thinking and writing and communicating. Right, let's talk about arguments, the elements of an argument. Okay, now we're not talking about getting into a fight here. We're talking about a logical argument. Elements of an argument, you have premises, the premise, which is the proposition from which the conclusion follows. You have the conclusion, which is the proposition which follows from the premises, and then the inference, which is the connection between the propositions by which the conclusion follows from the premises. And you'll see this as we get into the discussion of especially deductive logic, but you'll see this also in inductive logic. You have the premises, and then from those premises you draw the conclusion, but there's a connection between the premises and the conclusion. So kind of a easy universal example used everywhere. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Well, you have those first two statements are premises, and then you have the conclusion at the end. Socrates is mortal. That's the conclusion. And there's an inference that is made within those first two premises that means that the conclusion is going to be true. And you'll see this as we talk about other syllogisms. You'll see that this will become more clear to you. One more thing I wanted to share right now is the difference between deductive and inductive logic. Now, a lot of times you'll get the impression that deductive logic is arguing from universals to a particular, and that inductive logic is arguing from the particulars to the universal. That's not really the correct distinction between the two. Really what the difference is that in deductive logic, the premises guarantee the conclusion. And with inductive logic, the premises suggest the conclusion. You pile up the evidence and it points more and more in one direction. With deductive logic, if premise A is true and premise B is true, for example, and it is a valid argument, then the conclusion has to be true. Of course, that assumes premise A and premise B, in this example, are true. But if they are, the conclusion has to be true. So that's the difference between those types of logic. So we'll get into the different kinds of logic. In deductive logic, we'll talk a lot about syllogisms, and inductive logic will give us some examples of that. But I'm just up front here describing the basic difference between those two approaches.